I-1 Introduction. There are relationships in which you love with your whole heart, only to be met with cold silence. Times when you wait for a reply, and all that comes back is emptiness. You're the one who texts first, who worries first, who forgives first. And slowly you become the only one holding on to a bond that is quietly decaying over time. They grow used to your presence. They take your care for granted. They believe that no matter how distant they become, you will return, you will be patient, you will forgive, until one day you go silent. No complaints, no explanations, no trace of resentment. You just disappear. And it is precisely in that moment that everything begins to change. People are not afraid of your anger. They only start to fear when you stop caring. Because in your silence, they hear the sound of their own loss. Have you ever asked yourself, why are you always the one giving, the one forgiving, the one bending, and still the one who's taken for granted? Why is it that the more you love, the more you worry, the more you care, the colder they become toward you? It's not because you're not good enough. It's because you haven't yet understood one crucial truth. True value doesn't lie in sacrifice. It lies in self-possession. This is not a message about revenge, nor is it an invitation to turn cold. This is about reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. It's about learning to walk away with your head held high, without a single bitter word. It's about growing up, without needing to raise your voice. That is the essence of Stoicism, a philosophy that is not flashy, that doesn't call for rebellion, but quietly sows in you an unshakable strength. Stoicism teaches you cannot control how others act, but you can always control how you respond. You cannot force someone to love you the way you wish to be loved, but you can choose to walk away with dignity intact. Stoicism doesn't teach you to strike back. It teaches you to be still, to be self-possessed, to grow with unwavering grace. You don't need to stab with words. You only need to withdraw. And that alone is enough to leave those who once underestimated you feeling unsettled. Because the strongest person is not the one who wins back love, but the one who no longer needs it. And in this piece, you will discover 10 powerful attitudes, sharp, serene, and forged in the spirit of Stoicism. Each one will not only restore your value, but compel those who once looked down on you to quietly watch from afar. There are weapons that make no sound, yet change the entire course of a relationship. There are shifts that come without announcements, without declarations, but are enough to reverse your standing in the eyes of those who once belittled you. This is not vengeance. This is inner strength, not loud, not attention-seeking, but formidable. Perhaps you've already tried everything, explaining, proving, comforting, compromising, just to make someone stay. Perhaps you hope that your sincerity would one day change them. But Stoicism does not believe in changing others. It teaches only this: become so grounded that no one can ever hurt you again. You don't need to scream your pain. You don't need to weep so someone might understand your sacrifice. You don't need to force yourself into coldness, cruelty, or apathy. All you need are these 10 Stoic attitudes below. No drama, no hatred, no retaliation. Each one is a conscious choice, refined through stillness, wisdom, and the ability to look deeply within. And it is precisely these attitudes that make those who lost you start to fear. Not fear that you'll return and demand answers, but fear that you'll never return at all. Because when you change your way of living, change your energy, change even the way you respond, you send an unspoken message. I am no longer the person you once so easily dismissed. That's when the roles reverse. The one who was indifferent grows uneasy. The one who once pulled your emotional strings starts to lose their grip. And the irony is, you do nothing. You simply become quieter, clearer, more principled. Each of the 10 attitudes that follow is a quiet step, yet a seismic shift in the mind of the one who once let you go. No more pleading, no more appeasing. What remains is a stronger version of you, calm but never weak. And that precisely is what they'll regret the most. So if you're ready to step out of the shadows of dependence and return to the core strength within you, keep reading. 10 Stoic attitudes, sharp, composed, and chilling in clarity, await you just ahead. Attitude 1. Silence is not weakness. It is the severing of control. You once waited endlessly for replies that ended in a cold scene. You wrote out endless explanations, trying to fix, to hold on, to redeem. And you once believed, if I'm sincere enough, they'll change. But strangely, the more you spoke, the more they withdrew. The more you tried to prove yourself, the more invisible you became. Until one day, you felt tired. Not because you stopped loving, but because you finally understood. The more you react, the more they hold the strings. And you chose silence. No more messages, no more justifications, no more appearing just because they beckoned. And that was when the tide turned. People are not afraid of your anger. They only begin to fear when you go silent. Because this silence is different. It carries no hope. It does not wait for their return. It is simply an absence. And that void is what makes those who once dismissed you start to feel uneasy. Epictetus, the renowned Stoic philosopher, once said, "If someone speaks ill of you and you do not get angry, you have won." Silence in Stoicism is not passive. It is not weakness. It is an intentional, disciplined act. Because you no longer wish to waste energy on things you cannot control, the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors of others. You are silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because it is no longer necessary to speak to someone who is no longer worthy of hearing. Imagine someone who has grown used to your presence, who once knew that if they went silent for a few days, you would return, texting, reaching out, explaining. And now one day, they wait, but nothing comes. No message, no signal, no response. Only a complete and unshakable absence. And in that stillness, their mind starts to echo with questions. Has she truly let go? Does he no longer care? Has that person found peace without me? This silence is no longer avoidance. It becomes a mirror, one that reflects back to them their own selfishness, indifference, and the inflated ego that once believed that person will always be there. But no, that person has walked away, quietly, without noise, without looking back. Because a Stoic does not retaliate by inflicting pain. They simply withdraw to preserve their own peace. And in doing so, they become mysterious, untouchable, and profoundly valuable. I am not silent so that you'll chase me. I am silent because I no longer accept being controlled. And in that very moment, you begin to reclaim yourself. Attitude 2. Stop explaining because you owe no one a justification. You once found yourself speaking endlessly, not because you were wrong, but because you didn't want to be misunderstood. You tried to explain, to defend your feelings, to salvage some dignity in the face of a cold stare. But the more you spoke, the smaller you felt, as if every word vanished into a void, as if the other person never truly intended to understand. They were only listening to judge, not to empathize. And the most painful part, you knew it. And still, you kept explaining. Stoicism does not teach you to win with words. It teaches you to accept the truth. No one is obligated to understand you, especially if they have already chosen not to. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you can change, then do so. If not, learn to let go." Letting go does not mean you've lost. It means you've stopped pouring your energy into conversations where no one is truly listening. The Stoic does not seek validation, they seek steadiness. And steadiness is when you're strong enough to say, "I don't need your agreement. I just need to know who I am." Picture someone once criticized for being too quiet, ridiculed for choosing a path different from the crowd. They don't argue back. They don't justify. They simply keep living, nurturing their health, working in silence, building quality relationships, and quietly shining. Others may wonder, why don't you defend yourself? But they don't need to, because silence is the loudest statement someone underestimated can ever make. And strangely, over time, the very people who misunderstood you will begin to question themselves. You don't need to explain why you left. You don't need to justify why you no longer reply. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth, because true value isn't in what you say, it's in how you live. I'm not silent because I have nothing to say, but because I no longer need to be seen. And that is the clearest sign of a mind fortified by Stoic discipline. Attitude 3. Your journey doesn't need an audience. It only needs a clear goal. You were once underestimated for your quietness, labeled not successful enough just because you didn't flaunt your path. You may have heard them say you'll never make it without someone beside you, without someone to validate you. But what they didn't know was, you're not walking to impress. You're walking to become the best version of yourself. And then one day you grow in silence. No announcements, no well wishes, no search for applause, but you begin to change your posture, your presence, your energy. And in that moment, those who once belittled you begin to wonder, why don't they need me to succeed? Because you've realized a truth only the awakened understand. You don't need an audience for a meaningful journey. You just need a clear direction and unshakable resolve. Stoicism does not glorify spectacle. It exalts personal control, especially in how you spend your time and energy. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And you, once you chose to focus on yourself, stopped wasting it. You no longer spend your nights waiting for a message from someone who doesn't value you. Instead, you read, you learn new skills, you train, you build new foundations. Every step you take doesn't echo outward. It resounds within. And that alone is enough to change everything. Picture someone once dismissed as too soft, too ordinary, too safe. 6 months later, they are no longer the same. They walk with certainty. They speak with clarity. No explanations, no attention seeking, but each action whispers a truth. I have changed, and I need no one to validate that. Silent growth is the greatest fear of those who once underestimated you, because it cannot be controlled. It cannot be stopped. It depends on no one except you. I don't shine for admiration. I shine to light my own path. And you'll realize when your focus is sharp enough, the audience no longer matters. Attitude 4. Boundaries exist to protect you, not to please others. You've said yes many times when every part of you wanted to say no. You've let people into your life only to have them trample on your feelings, as if they weren't worth caring about, all because you fear being seen as selfish, cold, or difficult. But the more lenient you are with your own boundaries, the more you get overridden, the more you're taken for granted. Because people don't just take advantage of kindness, they grow accustomed to your availability, even when they have done nothing to deserve it. Emotional manipulators don't need to raise their voices. They just need to plant a vague sense of guilt that if you say no, you're the one at fault. And from that moment on, you live to appease, not to feel peace. Stoicism does not teach you to shut the world out. It teaches you to discern, to know which doors are worth opening and which must be closed for good. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that strength is the quiet ability to say no, calmly, firmly, without explanation or apology. Not because you hate anyone, but because you've begun to love your own peace more than the need to please others. Picture someone who once said yes to every request, who was always available when others needed them, even when they were utterly drained. Then one day they change. They no longer reply to midnight messages, no longer say yes to coffee invites from people who only show up when sad, no longer entertain shallow conversations just to be polite. They go quiet, but it's a silence with boundaries. They don't argue, but they know how to say, "That's enough." And suddenly, those who once manipulated them start to feel powerless. Boundaries don't need to be built with walls. All it takes is knowing what is acceptable and what is not, and refusing to feel guilty for choosing yourself first. That's when you step out of the game, leaving the other person sitting in the silence they once dismissed. I don't say no to oppose you. I say no to protect the one thing I control, my peace. And from that moment forward, you don't just live, you live with weight. Attitude 5, kind but no longer close. That is the pinnacle of maturity. You once believed that to walk away from someone, there had to be a dramatic reason, a heated argument, a betrayal, a deep wound. But reality is often harsher and gentler than that. People drift apart simply because respect fades. You've been there, quietly enduring the dismissiveness, the careless words, the growing emotional distance from someone who once felt close. You didn't react. You simply stepped back. You stopped checking in, stopped sharing your inner world, stopped trying to hold the connection together. But when you meet again, you still smile. You nod. No bitterness, but no openness either. It's not coldness. It's the kind of growth that only those who have been quietly hurt will understand. Stoicism doesn't teach you to love someone forever. It teaches you to love selectively and to have the courage to let go, respectfully. Seneca once said, "We should treat everyone with kindness, even our enemies, not because they deserve it, but because we do." Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is the strength to let go of resentment and the clarity to never let them back into the sacred space of your inner world. Imagine someone who used to be your closest friend, your partner, your companion, but over time, they stopped treating you with care. They didn't hurt you outright, but they no longer honored the space you once held in their life. So you didn't make a scene. You didn't accuse. You didn't explain. You simply stepped out of the intimacy, and when you meet again, you greet them. A quiet nod, eyes neither cold nor warm, and that moment stuns them because they were used to your forgiveness. They were used to you always returning. But this time, you don't. Not out of anger, but because you've grown past your rage and you've become wiser about who gets to stay close. You don't need to announce your departure. You don't need to cut ties publicly. You simply keep living, and your absence of intimacy becomes the clearest ending. I'm not angry with you. I've just made no space for you in the peace I'm building. And that truth cuts deeper than any criticism ever could. Attitude 6. Immune to criticism because you understand that emotion is a choice. You've been hurt before by what seemed like offhand remarks, a cruel joke, a sharp comment, a disrespectful glance. And you reacted. You got angry. You defended yourself. You spent the entire day thinking about that one sentence someone said. But the more you reacted, the weaker you felt. You were caught in a spiral someone else created. Simply because you forgot, your emotions are something you can choose. They might call you selfish, arrogant, fake, distant. They might mock you behind your back, downplay your success, pretend your presence means nothing. But this time you don't react. You simply smile, a soft smile of someone who has matured beyond their instincts. And then you move on, lightly, without a word, without a frown. Epictetus, once a slave who became a great Stoic philosopher, wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Stoicism teaches that no word has the power to break you unless you let it into your mind. Once you shift your perspective, what used to wound you becomes nothing more than a distant echo. Not a knife anymore, just a passing breeze. Picture someone once targeted by those they trusted, old friends whispering behind their back, an ex-lover saying, "You'll never amount to anything." They knew your soft spots, knowing they went for them, not with actions, but with words. But this person doesn't crumble. They don't chase after explanations. They don't post about it. They don't beg anyone to know the truth. Instead, they live well. They stay quiet, but grow brighter each day. Because they know criticism is simply a test of inner stability. The critic's ego collapses the moment they see you, unfazed. And that is power. You don't need to scream to defend yourself. You only need to stand still, steady, clear, and firm in your refusal to give anyone the power to sway your peace. I heard you, but I didn't receive it because my peace is not up for negotiation. And from that moment, you step into the deepest safety of the mind, a space where no one can shake you unless you allow them to. Attitude 7. Dignity is the light you carry, even when no one sees it. You've been dismissed, not because you were wrong, but because you didn't show off. You did what was right, lived kindly, kept your heart clean, and still you were misunderstood, overlooked, abandoned, as if your goodness meant nothing at all. In those moments, your instincts scream, fight back, prove yourself, make them see. But the harder you try to prove your worth, the further you drift from your real value. Because anything that needs shouting to be noticed was never true strength to begin with. The Stoic doesn't prove, they simply live with integrity. When the world ignores you, when no one recognizes your effort, when someone you trusted turns away without explanation, the Stoic does not scream for justice. They choose to hold their dignity, even in solitude. Seneca once wrote, "We should strive to be worthy of admiration, even if no one admires us." Because dignity is not something you possess when people are watching. It is what you preserve when no one is. Picture someone quietly betrayed. They don't rant. They don't expose. They don't try to prove they're the better person. They just keep living, showing up on time, being kind to strangers, honoring their own promises. They don't use their past to ask for sympathy. They don't justify bitterness with pain. They choose serenity, not because they're unhurt, but because they understand. You don't need anyone to validate your dignity. You just need to not betray it. And here's the irony. The more people expect you to break, the more disappointed they are to see you remain whole. The more they wait for your downfall, the more your calm, quiet resilience unsettles them. You don't need spotlights to shine because real light radiates from within. I don't need anyone to see my worth as long as I don't betray what I know is right. And in that moment, when you choose to uphold your dignity in silence, in stillness, in darkness, you begin to shine in the unshakable way only the truly grounded ever can. Attitude 8, walking away without goodbye because freedom needs no applause. You once stayed because you thought you needed to say something before leaving. A final explanation, an apology, a proper farewell. But then you realized they never needed your words. They were only watching to see if you were still too weak to walk away. They were used to your return, used to you torturing yourself to hold on to something already breaking, and they assumed you couldn't let go for good. Until one day, you went silent. No drama, no final message. No, I hope one day you'll understand me. You simply gathered your pieces and left, quietly, without a sound, without looking back. And that unannounced departure, that was what shook them the most. Not because they loved you so much they couldn't bear to lose you, but because they misread that final silence as surrender, when in truth, it was your liberation. Stoicism doesn't teach you to create spectacle. It teaches you to know when enough is enough and to leave with your dignity intact. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't waste time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one." You don't need to argue with someone who no longer cares to understand. You don't need to explain why you're leaving, because if they didn't listen when you stayed, they won't hear you when you're gone. The Stoic walks away because they know that freedom doesn't need clapping hands. Sometimes the softest release echoes louder than the most dramatic goodbye. Picture someone who was suffocating in an unhealthy relationship. No violence, no betrayal, just chronic neglect and a cold indifference like a wall. Day after day they stayed, hoping for change, but no sign ever came. And one day they stood up, no crying, no begging, no text, just quietly cleared their heart and stepped out, leaving behind someone stunned, confused, not knowing what just happened. You don't need to warn those who took you for granted, because those who are worthy, they saw you withdrawing long ago. And those who aren't, no explanation will ever be enough. I didn't walk away to be missed. I walked away because I finally understood. I don't need permission to be happy. And only when you can walk away without turning back, are you truly free. Attitude 9, achievements need no recognition, because you know value lies in effort, not applause. Have you ever poured your heart into something important, and no one noticed? No praise, no questions. No one truly saw what it took for you to reach that point, and so you tucked away the joy quietly, half proud, half hollow, because deep down you still long for something, a look of recognition, a simple, "I'm proud of you." But then you realize the world owes you no applause, and real value doesn't come from the number of hands clapping, but from every moment you refuse to give up. Stoicism makes this clear. You are the only one responsible for your success, and the only one who needs to recognize it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do what's right, the rest doesn't matter." To a Stoic, doing something well is not about praise. It's about integrity, about doing what aligns with your inner values. They don't live to impress. They live to become more solid after every trial, and that's why they're immune to silence or indifference. Picture someone quietly rebuilding after a failure. No one cheered them on when they started. No one celebrated when they achieved something. But day by day, they stayed the course, studying, improving step by step. No post bragging about milestones. No long stories about past pain. Just quiet growth, quiet strength. And then one day, those who once ignored them begin to notice a steadier presence, a clearer gaze, a person no longer seeking approval. And slowly, they begin to feel left behind. You don't need anyone's praise to know you've done well, because if an achievement only matters when someone applauds it, then it's not inner strength. It's just a tool for external validation. And when your life depends on others' approval, you will always live in fear that you're not enough. The Stoic chooses to act without needing to be seen. They know that true value isn't found under the spotlight. It's found in the quiet, consistent effort repeated each day, even when no one acknowledges it. I don't need anyone to recognize my results, because every steady step is already the greatest reward. And when you live this way, the indifference of others becomes the clearest sign that you're going further than they ever imagined. Attitude 10, emotional self-mastery. No one controls your mind but you. You once let a single comment ruin your entire day. A message left unread robbed you of sleep. A cold stare made you question your worth. And the hardest part? Those who hurt you continued on with their lives as if nothing happened. You tried to control the relationship, to control the other person, to control the situation, just to feel safe again. But the more you tried to control, the more anxious you became. The more you waited for someone's reaction, the more you lost yourself, until you came to a core truth. No one can hurt you unless you give them that power. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was once a slave, said it best. It's not things that disturb us, but our view of them. You cannot control what people say. You cannot control who loves you or who betrays you. But you can always control how you respond. And once you do, you reclaim the greatest power of all, the power to govern your own mind. A Stoic is not emotionless, but they are not ruled by emotion. They feel, but they do not leave the door of their soul open for anyone to enter at will. They love deeply, live sincerely, but still have the strength to walk away with awareness when their kindness is abused. Picture someone who once bent for love, who changed themselves to be accepted, who tried too hard to hold someone in their life. They once cried from being forgotten, felt torn apart by a single seen message. But then they changed, not because they stopped loving, but because they grew in understanding. Happiness doesn't begin with someone else's actions. It begins with inner stability. Now they still love, but without attachment. They still care, but without losing themselves. They still feel, but no longer react from a place of instability. They are not robots, but they know when it's time to conserve their energy. Emotional self-mastery isn't the rejection of love. It's the expression of love with dignity. It's not the freezing of the heart, but the opening of it to the right person, at the right time, in the right way. I don't need to control you. I only need to control how I live, how I respond, and how I preserve my peace. And when you're no longer shaken by indifference, by criticism, or by unjust stares, you are not just free, you become untouchable. Ending, awakening, and a call to action. This is not a video about revenge. It's not a rallying cry to rise up and make someone regret losing you. And it's certainly not a speech designed to help you outshine them through bitterness or pride. This is the journey of returning to yourself, fully, quietly, and powerfully. Because the wise don't need to rebel to make others regret underestimating them. They simply become better, day by day in silence. And that alone is enough to stir reflection in those who once dismissed them. When you stop arguing, stop explaining, stop chasing, you reclaim all the energy once scattered and begin a quiet rebirth from within. People won't realize your value when you're always there. They'll only start to feel the emptiness once you vanish in silence. They won't understand you better because you try harder to explain, but they will start to question when you have nothing left to say. And they'll never imagine you can thrive without them until they see you glowing in peace that needs no performance. That's when everything reverses. Those who once overlooked you begin to ask themselves, who have I lost? Maybe they'll never admit it. Maybe their pride will hold fast. But deep down they'll know you are no longer the person they once thought you were. And maybe this time, you're not coming back. You don't need to be the strongest, the most successful, or the most perfect to be respected. You only need to be yourself, but firmer, more principled, and no longer easily swayed. That is the essence of Stoic strength, not the power to control others, but the power to master yourself. You can choose to be the victim, living in sorrow, resentment, and blame. Or you can choose freedom, to let go of false expectations, to sever emotional dependency, and return to the one true safe place, your own mind. What will you choose? If you saw yourself in any of these 10 attitudes, if you've been dismissed, underestimated, or hurt in silence, then maybe it's time to come back to yourself. Not to protect your pride, but to protect your peace. Not to prove anything, but so that you no longer have to. Because real happiness isn't when someone finally says you're worthy. It's when you no longer need them to say it to know that you are. And if someone once dismissed you, abandoned you, or ignored you, then your silent growth, your calm resilience in the face of criticism, and your kindness even after the closeness is gone, is the most powerful wake-up call they will ever receive. If this video touched something in you, share it, because somewhere out there, someone might need to hear this more than you think. And if you're on the path to living with strength and serenity, subscribe to the channel so that each day we continue this journey together, calmer but never weak, awake but never cold, and becoming someone who lives true to their deepest essence, strong, sovereign, and unshakable.